I'm Tina Fordham, and you're watching The Navigator. This is a special episode of our series where I'll address the recent escalation in the Middle East conflict in the context of the other geopolitical risks that could move markets this year, which we've called an inflection point. Heading now into the second quarter, markets remain optimistic about the growth outlook, but at the same time, we retain our view that we've entered a new geopolitical risk supercycle, which is our proprietary analytical framework. To recap, the geopolitical risk supercycle is defined by the presence of a greater number of risk factors, like more conflicts, plus weaker global alliances and institutions to mitigate them. The convergence means more event risks, most recently Iran's attack on April 13th, where it fired hundreds of drones and missiles at Israel, which was an unprecedented escalation. Thanks to the performance of air defenses and cooperation from the US, the UK, France, and Jordan, 99% of the missiles were destroyed, and mercifully there were no casualties. But 10 years ago, that would not have been true. The good news is we are not entering a third world war, but nor should we expect a return to the status quo. We are still in what we are calling the danger zone. Market participants seem to have decided that Iran's attack was symbolic, when in fact it was foiled by superior air defenses. We think it's a mistake to assume that the Russia-Ukraine and the Middle East wars are somehow Goldilocks wars that will be managed and won't get too hot. U.S. markets may be in a stronger position to shrug off conflicts thanks to U.S. energy independence, but for countries like the UK and Germany that are net energy importers and are struggling to climb out of recession, and for EM countries that are vulnerable to a strong U.S. dollar, as well as the countries in the Middle East itself, the risks remain elevated. War is inflationary, and lower U.S. Treasury yields may also result. All of these factors will, of course, impact the interest rate and inflation trajectory, which is why we're talking about geopolitical risks. So what happens next? We expect a heightened geopolitical risk premium ahead of an expected Israeli counterattack, which could come in days. All eyes will be on whether Israel complies with U.S. requests to exercise restraint or whether there is a broader escalation. As before, there is a certain choreography to the military tactics that can be employed. One plausible response would be for Israel to target the launchers from where the missiles were fired. Another would be to target Iranian proxies in the region. The worst-case scenario would be an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. Though this would not be a short-term response, it is something that is a non-zero probability. A fourth option would be de-escalation. Diplomacy may have fallen out of fashion lately, but it is an important tool in the toolbox for leaders brave enough to use it. What happens next in the Middle East also has clear implications for the other potentially systemic geopolitical risks we are watching in Russia-Ukraine, between China and its neighbors in the South China Sea, and for U.S. elections, the single most watched political signpost of the year. These are all here on our Navigator watch list for April. Now, Washington's robust support for Israel has been costly in political terms as the war in Gaza has raged and stoked controversy. But now Joe Biden may be in a better position to deflect criticism by underscoring that U.S. support for Israel is necessary to avoid a wider regional conflict. Outside the U.S., American allies from NATO to Japan and South Korea to Saudi Arabia are watching closely to see if the U.S. is as good as its word when it comes to protecting its defense partners. U.S. credibility as a reliable global partner is very much at stake in this U.S. election year. The Kremlin, for its part, will also be observing events closely given the close ties between Iran and Moscow and with respect to the spring offensive that Russia is reportedly planning in Ukraine. I also want to flag that the spectacle of the incredibly effective Israeli air defenses will put renewed pressure on the U.S. Congress to pass the stalled military aid bill on Ukraine, which is similarly attacked by drones and missiles on a daily basis but lacks the air defenses to intercept them. The U.S. House of Representatives will vote this week, most likely, on whether to approve more military aid to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and the bill will now have much greater urgency. One possible silver lining to the Mideast tensions is that chances of passage are probably better this week than last. I'm going to close on a cautionary note, and that is that I am advising our C-suite and investor clients to be prepared for the period between now and U.S. elections in November to be very bumpy geopolitically. For opportunistic actors wanting to change the facts on the ground and increase their negotiating position with a new administration, this window is their chance to do so, especially when Washington is distracted. For more detail on our views, register for our second quarter webinar on April 25th via the link and sign up to receive our newsletter. They are both free.